All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. I'm happy to be joined today by Kelley Paul, the wife of Senator Rand Paul. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
I obviously want to talk to you about a couple of different things, but we have to start with your most recent experience in the streets of Washington, D.C., which I think a lot of people around the country have seen, and I've heard a lot of reactions from certainly our readers and listeners to it. Tell me a little bit about what happened that night.
Well, as we were ending the RNC event at the White House, we started to walk toward the gates that lead to 15th Street, where the W Hotel and the Willard are. And the Secret Service was informing everyone that there were protesters outside, and we'd heard some of it, during the event. So they asked that everyone get on buses. So this idea that somehow we walked into a demonstration is completely false. We, of course, did not want to leave by that entrance, as did no one else. So we all got on these buses, and the buses were taking everyone to the Trump Hotel, where there were some after events. A lot of people were staying there. They also had a pretty good barricade set up because it's a busy street and you could get Ubers really easily. So we stood outside with several friends of ours. Our son was with us. He got his Uber and went on. And my friend, Meredith Eiler, said, hey, you guys, if you guys are going to the W, you can hop in with us to our Uber. So Rand and I climb in with Meredith and her friend Shelley, and we head off to the W. And as we get about 2 blocks from it, and the Uber driver is trying to turn his way down the street, there is a police car there, and they've blocked the street, and you cannot drive up to any of these hotels, which is where you saw a lot of these people being attacked. And our Uber driver was, of course, like, hey, either get out or get back, what are you guys deciding to do? And we actually got out, and Meredith went up and asked if we could actually drive down the street. She told the policewoman there that Senator Paul was in the car. And even though the street didn't look necessarily that scary from that angle, it was just dark. There weren't any protesters or anything. There were random people sort of walking around. It was very late. We couldn't drive to the door. We really didn't have any choice because that's where we were staying. So we just decided, well, it's only a couple hundred yards. We can walk. So we start walking down. The first 100 yards or so, a few random people started yelling stuff and jeering, as I think was the experience of most people that looked like they'd come from the Trump event. But no one recognized Rand, and we're just sort of briskly walking. We kind of, at one point, crossed the street as some people were yelling things like, yeah, you better cross the street, Trumpers, or something like, just typical kind of stuff. But we're not really that frightened. And then all of a sudden, we start hearing someone yell, oh my God, that's Rand Paul. And that's when all chaos broke loose. And we started seeing all these people start and rushing toward us. And on the corner, about 25 yards ahead were 2 police officers in a car. So we rushed briskly up to them and stood with them. And we said to them, look, Rand said, I'm in Congress and I've been recognized. Is there any way we could get in the police car? Because we're worried that this is going to suddenly cause a lot of people. And, literally within a minute, the crowd had doubled and then tripled. And to all the people who have seen the video that's on television of us walking with the police with the bicycles as a barricade, let me tell you, the first 10 minutes was much worse than that, because for close to 10 minutes, and this was live streamed by someone, I can't remember his name, but for close to 10 minutes, we are literally pressed up against only 2 officers as an entire circle of mob, people are just surrounding us, Antifa, BLM, and they're all screaming in our face, and we cannot move at all. We cannot move forward. We can't walk. We can't do anything. And we're just standing there as they scream all kinds of vile, disgusting things at us. They actually poured some foul-smelling liquid all over my friend Shelley's back, so her dress was soaked. We're just standing there, and finally, when the police sort of blew some whistles and we saw 4 other officers coming with the big bikes to create the moving barricade, it was only until that moment that I really was at least somewhat relieved that we might make it. But even then, all the way to the hotel, I kept thinking, we're going to get hit in the head with a brick. we're going to get knocked down. They're going to throw something horrible at us. I didn't realize Shelley had already had something thrown on her back. We were just waiting for something awful to happen, like we've seen in Portland and Seattle, where people are physically attacked. So it was truly one of the most terrifying moments of my life.
What were they screaming at you during this?
Well, the most common thing was say her name, say her name. They were screaming that, Breonna Taylor. And when it first started, before there were, maybe only like 30 people, I briefly tried to meet the eyes of the man in front of me that was screaming that in my face. And I tried to say, he said, do you believe Black Lives Matter? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, why won't you say her name? And I was trying to say, my husband has sponsored the Breonna Taylor Act, the bill that would end no-knock raids. And I tried to get that out. But it's almost like in those mob situations, me meeting their eyes and trying to say anything only enraged them further. And they were just screaming at us. So after that, I just kind of looked down and started to pray. I mean, I literally was praying the entire time. My friends who watched it, they're like, we saw you looking down. My one friend said, I could see your heart just beating out of your chest. And I did. I said, I was scared for my life. But then, of course, there were all kinds of other things like, F and Rand Paul, we're going to F you up. I was called, Trump whore, bitch, racist bitch. I mean, just all kinds of just nasty things that people were yelling in our ears in between the typical no justice, no peace and all that.
I know that it's difficult to feel attacked in this way. There were a lot of people, though, who were dismissive of it. What would you say to them about saying, oh, well, this is just them using their right to protest or something like that?
It makes me furious. We've had the last, 4 years of people telling us, even at like the Democrat convention, that if you use the wrong pronouns to someone who appears to be a different gender, that you are committing violence against them. And all DNC, candidates are up there saying, oh, this is violence, or silence is violence. But 100 people who are circling you will not let you move. I mean, that's a crime. You're on the street, a public street, and you cannot move forward because they're screaming in your face. I just find it fascinating that all of the left who are so insane about, we can't even be outside on our bicycle, but alone without a mask. If you look at that video, over half the people don't have masks, and those that do, half of those have them down around their chin as they're screaming in our face, practically spitting on us and not allowing us to move, not allowing us to have the freedom to go to our own hotel while they shriek at us. That is violence. That is pure violence. It was incredibly threatening. And, we were not the only ones. I mean, ours made a lot of publicity, but I will tell you, we had a friend staying at the Willard. He and his wife is still traumatized. They came up to him and slapped his glasses off of his face and then dared him to try to pick them up. And he was so afraid. And his wife was like, no, but they physically intimidated so many people. They also sprayed, one of the Antifa people sprayed pepper spray on the back of one of our friend's sons. There was real violence going on that night. And I consider what happened to us to be real violence. And I would dare Kamala Harris or AOC, I guarantee you, if they were ever surrounded by a bunch of people on the right, or any people screaming and calling them, the B word and the W word and telling them that they're going to F them up, that they wouldn't consider that to be threatening and
Kamala Harris obviously has the unique, position of being one of the senator's colleagues. Are you surprised that she didn't issue a pretty severe and immediate condemnation of this assault on one of the, one of the smallest and most important clubs in the country, the Senate?
I actually was, and I think it's just very disturbing that she wouldn't stand up for one of her fellow senators. We're all in this together. We're all trying to do the best we can, and it is a very polarizing political situation. But let's be honest, when Kamala came to the Senate, she had a lot of work to do on her own record with criminal justice reform. I mean, as Tulsi Gabbard so aptly called her out, I mean, she was trying to jail poor parents who couldn't control their 17-year-olds for truancy. She was, locking people up for marijuana. She does not have a good record on, mass incarceration, criminal justice. And when she got to the Senate, she sought out someone who has worked across the aisle more than any single other person in Congress on criminal justice, and that's Rand Paul. He's done it since 2010, whether it's civil asset forfeiture, not letting juveniles be detained. He gave so many speeches on the terrible, terrible tragedy of Khalif Browder. He spoke out about Eric Garner in New York for years. So Kamala came to see Rand and asked him to be a co-sponsor with her on a bail reform bill, and he immediately did. She even acknowledged in the debates that, as an example of someone she's worked across the aisle, it's Rand Paul. I have sat and talked to Kamala's husband many times at Senate spouse events and thought we had a great relationship. So no, I would think at the bare minimum, they would call out someone who is mobbing and surrounding and being absolutely vicious to their coworkers. And I'm very disturbed by the fact that they've never said a message of support or telling their voters, because these are their voters. These are not Trump voters. These are not people on the right, telling their voters that these kind of tactics are not acceptable.
It has to be difficult to be the wife of a prominent and recognizable Republican. Is this the first time you've had an experience like this?
It really is. And this is so incredibly sad. I mean, it's the first time that we've had something be this violent, I should say.
Yeah.
Now, last October, when our book came out, we were doing a speech at the Reagan Library. And we popped in at a little sushi restaurant. We had done an event at the Reagan Ranch, and we hadn't eaten lunch, and we had a late, we just thought we're going to pull into this sushi restaurant and have a quick bite to eat before we go to Reagan Library. It's like 3:00 in the afternoon. This little sushi place is completely empty except for some, 70-year-old couple sitting at the sushi bar. So we're with our friends and some of our staff, and we're trying to just gobble up some food. And the woman and her husband come over and start berating us. And actually, Sergio, who works for Rand, videoed them and put that on the internet. So this is, we're just trying. We tried to diffuse the situation. We tried to just say, look, you're welcome to your opinion, but you can't stand here and basically scream at us while we're trying to eat our lunch. This is a violation. Please stop. And they would not. So that had happened to us, and we've had a few comments here and there, but to tell you the truth, I mean, I almost lived full time in DC for 3 years. I'd run on the mall, Rand and I would walk everywhere. We never had this kind of negativity that we're seeing now, ever. I've never felt unsafe in DC, ever. But now I do.
Mm-hmm. You have to feel like things have changed. I mean, I remember the 2009 depiction of the Tea Party protests and how people were offended that folks would show up at these various town halls where, congressmen would go to defend the bailouts and the things that were happening and Obamacare and everything related to that. And I remember the way the national media would talk about those as being, potentially violent events. Now, they weren't actually violent. They were just aggressive and yelling on occasion. But thinking about the way that the national media depicted those events versus the way they're depicting these events, it's night and day. And it just seems to me like something has really changed in the way that the media is willing to go along with an aggressive form of leftism, that really does get, to the statements of people like Maxine Waters and others. It gets in your face. It confronts you in public. It drives you out and makes it uncomfortable for people to be in public with their families even.
I agree. And it really goes to the bias of the media, how they have run cover for this terrible violence, the burnings, the lootings, the destroying of businesses, and the terrible injuries that people have suffered. I mean, I follow like Andy No on Twitter, and I've seen the videos now for 100 days now. The young man that was kicked in the head and hauled out of his car. And those are the images that were running through my mind. And I have to say, it just disgusts me the way they've tried to portray the Tea Party movement you hit the nail on the head. When the Tea Party groups were getting together, they were protesting specific policies and ideas that they disagreed with. You know, the bailout. Tea Party stood for taxed enough already. You know, it's the idea that, and we quote you in our book about this whole idea that, you know, there's sort of the protected class and crony capitalism, and then there are the professionals and the working people who, through their tax dollars, are funding bailouts and subsidies. And that's really what the Tea Party movement was about. They try to portray it as a hatred of President Obama or somehow a racist thing, which is 100% false, and they know it. And I'll give you, you know, an example. So I don't know if you're familiar with our former Lieutenant Governor, Janine Hampton.
A little bit, but not very well. So maybe walk our listeners through. Yeah.
Janine is from our hometown here in Bowling Green. Amazing woman. She's an Air Force veteran. She's an engineer. She's an African-American woman. And she told me that she had never supported or been involved in politics until she heard Rand speak at a Tea Party rally in Bowling Green, Kentucky, back in like 2009, where just spontaneously and organically 500 people showed up in the town square in Bowling Green. Literally, Rand had left coaching one of our son's Little League games and is standing there in shorts and a t-shirt and is shocked. So Janine was one of Rand's first campaign donations. She had never done anything like this before. As a private citizen, but she got really involved in the Tea Party movement, and she traveled all over the country by herself. She's like, there I would be, an African-American woman. I'd get on buses. I went to events. I went to events in DC, all over the place. And she said, I met friends everywhere. People were so welcoming to me. She said, I was more into politics than my husband, so I went to a lot of this stuff by myself. I was really fascinated with it. And that was really the genesis of her involvement in politics. And she's told me before, she said, I never saw any racism or any hatred of President Obama for his race. She said, I disagreed with his policies, and I was there with people who felt the same. And so she sort of, you know, became progressively more and more involved and was elected as the first African-American, you know, lieutenant governor in our state, you know, maybe one of the few in the country. So I would ask them to talk to somebody like Janine Hampton, instead of just posting some picture of somebody, you know, cheering at a rally and say, oh, this is racist hate, when we see real horrible hate going on across the country, flinging Molotov cocktails and burning buildings. And now the new tactic is going up to people in restaurants and throwing their food on the ground. You know, as Rand said, he tweeted the other day, he's like, you know, these poor restaurants have barely survived COVID. And, you know, while the weather's nice, people can eat outdoors and have less risk. But now we have these BLM and Antifa activists going up and terrorizing people. And I will also say, for people who say, oh, well, these are just outliers, it's not really, you know, BLM. The head of BLM in Louisville, her response to our mob attack was that she was glad that Rand and his wife were frightened, and that we should be frightened. And she hopes we're frightened. This just, you know, this reminds me of when Reagan said, if fascism comes to the United States, it will be in the form of liberalism. And that's exactly what's happening.
How did you and Rand meet?
We met in Atlanta. I had graduated from Rhodes College, and I was working for Sprint. I did marketing communications for Sprint and Nortel Networks and other companies in the telecommunications industry for about 12 years. So I had been living there for a couple years, and Rand actually did his internship in general surgery. You may know he's an eye surgeon, but he did a year of general surgery before he went to do his residency at Duke in eye surgery. So he had already graduated from Duke in med school, but he spent a year and a half in Atlanta. And we met at an oyster roast. I had been kind of on and off again with this guy I was dating. He invited me to go, and at the last minute he had to meet him there, and at the last minute he had to leave because a friend was in a fender bender. And so I didn't know a lot of people, and I was standing around in the backyard on an April day, and this really cute curly-headed guy came up and asked me if I wanted a beer, and I said sure, and we started talking. And you know, I thought he was cute. At first I did kind of blow him off a little bit because I thought he was like 18 years old, because he was, I think we were both, he was 26, I was 25, but I thought he was still in college. He looked really young. But the more I talked to him, the more I realized that he was an amazing person, and like no one I'd ever met before. And that was it.
Did you know what you were getting into when you decided to get married?
No, not at all. I did not with the politics stuff. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew he was fascinated with politics, but something he always said, his father is a doctor also. So he was just starting his medical career. And he always said, my father said, if you go through all of the training and all the education to be a physician, you need to work for at least 10 years. Because I think Ron had actually, the first time he ran, he'd worked, I think, less than 10 years. And then he went back and worked another 10. But he's like, don't get the bug for politics too early. So, when you're 25, 10 years sounds like an eternity. I'm like, oh, he'll get over this stuff. And really, until the situation with Jim Bunning, I don't think that he had really, he hadn't really been that involved other than, he had a political group that rated the tax and spending issues in Kentucky. And we did rankings for that and things like that. But mostly our life was, just all about raising our 3 kids and his medical practice.
The decision to get involved in politics, it's always one that is difficult, I think, because of what it can do to your family. It can take minor stories and turn them into major ones. Every family has drama and dysfunction on some level, but basically, the things that are small failures in life that people have, mistakes that they might make, get completely blown out of proportion when it comes to entering the world of politics. Did that give you any hesitancy before that decision was made on Rand's part? And did it give you any pause?
Of course. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. The politics of personal destruction. And it's not just you they'll tear down. It's not just your spouse. It's your kids. It's your second cousin. It's anybody. And it's terrible. It's horrible. As my friends always say to me, they're like, Rand has given up a lot to do this. We had a great life before. And I think that's one of the reasons why, in some ways, the political attacks don't bother me at all, because I know if he's not reelected and he feels the same way, we'll just go back to our old life, which we were perfectly happy in. He's doing this because he believes in the issues that he fights for, and he tries to very hard to make a difference. But you're right. We know that putting yourself out there in politics just puts a huge target on your back and on your kids' back. And I try to keep my family out of it as much as possible. I'm always out there speaking out for Rand. But it scares me a lot. When he decided to run for president, I think that was the biggest anxiety I had. I always said to my friends when they'd ask me about it, I was like, I don't care about the political attacks. I just care about how this affects our real life, our family and, our parents, and the anxieties that all of these things go with, and our kids, and the unfair attacks that they will be open to. But in the end, we just decided, and our kids and I, that, we want to be brave. We don't want to just not do something out of fear. We want to, if you have an opportunity to be a voice for what you believe in, you should do it and not let fear stop you. And we're a very strong family. And so that was, part of our decision to keep going with this.
I think that given the level of shift that we've seen in tone, where politicians are more targeted now, where their family members are more targeted now, this is going to have to lead to some changes. Do you think that? One of the big things that's always been true, in Washington, is that very few politicians actually have armed guards or anybody around them on a regular basis. It's shocking to people, I think, actually, how elected representatives, even very recognizable ones, just show up by themselves or with a junior staffer or something like that, and that's it to most events. Do you think that needs to change?
Possibly. I know, I will tell you that Rand and I did not sleep all night that night, and we did not leave in the morning without Capitol Police. We were, we knew that people knew where we were. And I hate it in a way, because I can't, and I do, you're exactly right. I couldn't, I rarely read stuff on Twitter, but I have seen people say things like, oh, we know this was staged because they have security and they have limos or they have car service, you know, and it's like they have no idea how the real world works for people who are serving. I mean, if you're not leadership, you don't have any guards around you. But we are changing that. I mean, we've asked now Rand in the airport, he's asking now for police protection. And they're willing to do that if you make the effort. In the past, we didn't feel like it. I will tell you, it got equally ugly during Kavanaugh, and a lot of Congress people were also asking for police escorts through the airport or to their cars because people were going crazy. I remember Rand said that he got on an escalator during the Kavanaugh hearings, and two women got in front of him and behind him with their phones trying to provoke a response. And he's standing there and he had his carry-on bag on the step. He had one step between with his carry-on bag, and the woman got between his bag and him. And she was like, oh, you think you can, you know, put your bag up here and protect me and protect yourself and not have to hear me. And she's screaming in his face. And he said he was standing there the whole time as they're going down an escalator in this incredibly dangerous situation. He's like, if I let go of my suitcase, it's going to roll over her feet and I'm going to be accused of, you know, trying to hurt this woman. If I hold on to it, it's still got to go over, you know, I've got to go. He's like, it's terrifying. He's like, I didn't know what to do. These are the situations that the left is increasingly trying. These are the tactics and the situations that they're trying to put people in to provoke a response, to make us look bad. And it's being egged on by Maxine Waters and Cory Booker. Get up in their face, get in their face. It's so unhealthy. And no one is doing this on the right to anybody, any of the elected officials on the left. We are the nonviolent people. I do believe the left has become the party of violence, aggression. They almost have, and this is the way I was describing it to a friend of mine this weekend. If you have a religious zeal that you think the other side is bad and evil, you can justify any behavior, you know, including violence. And I did feel that in that mob, they had convinced themselves with a religious fervor that because we had been to, you know, Donald, we were supporters of Trump and we had been to the RNC thing, that we were bad people. And they were profoundly ignorant, of course, because they had no idea that Rand has, you know, authored or co-authored, you know, literally dozens of criminal justice reform bills, and that he had actually authored the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act and actually talked to Breonna Taylor's family. They were ignorant of all that. They just see us as the other. And that is the absolute antithesis of how we can ever be civil to each other in politics. And I don't see anybody, you know, on the Democrat side condemning this. You know, I'll go back to the Tea Party. People on the right had real issues with a lot of President Obama's policies. But I would always say to people that I found President Obama and Michelle Obama to be gracious, and I never would try to tear them down as human beings. But with President Trump, it's become almost a cult of personality. I try to engage with people and I'll say, well, what are the policies that you really hate so much? And they can't answer that. They hate him, the person. And part of that is because the media constantly reinforces this idea that he is a liar and a cheater, and, you know, whether it's the Russian hoax or whatever it is, they are constantly saying that, so that even people who I normally used to think were fairly well informed have this, you know, as I said, almost religious hatred against Trump and now against anybody that is on the conservative side even.
You obviously are married to someone who has been navigating the relationship that he has with President Trump carefully over the past several years. Someone who, you know, has voted against him quite a lot, actually, in the Senate, but also clearly established a line of communications and has gotten some benefits out of it in terms of the priorities of the administration on foreign policy and in other spaces. What do you think about the relationship that Senator Paul has with the president, and how do you think that he's tried to approach it?
You know, I think people would be surprised, as you pointed out, to know that Rand has voted against the president's particular policies more than any other senator, including Mitt Romney and these vocal critics. because Rand always stands for the issues. And I would say what might surprise people to know is that when he has, such as like executive order for the wall, because, you know, Rand was very critical of President Obama for use of executive order, and he's been the same with Trump. And you know what happens? President Trump calls him up and says, well, Rand, I know that, you know, I know your principles, and I appreciate it. He doesn't call him up and berate him or call him a loser or anything. They actually have a really good relationship in terms of, I think President Trump knows exactly what Rand stands for, and that, you know, Rand is always encouraging the president and, you know, to do the things that he really stands for, which, you know, President Trump actually, you know, I think he took a lot of the wind out of the sails when Rand was running for president by being so vocally opposed to the Iraq war and the needless intervention in the Middle East. And Rand is like, you know, these are the things that I believe in, and I want to be an advocate for these things. This is our duly elected president of the United States. I'm not going to stand on my high horse with all these other people and try to just tear him down. I'm going to try to say, these are the things I think he's doing a great job at, whether it's, you know, our fantastic Supreme Court justices that he's appointed, whether it is a more restrained approach to foreign policy. You know, think about it. When Trump did not send in American soldiers to fight between the Kurds and the Turks. Remember a few years ago, I'll never forget that New York Times headline. It made me furious. It was, Trump abandons our Kurdish allies. Trump abandons. Meanwhile, Turkey is our NATO ally. Mm-hmm. And by choosing not to get pulled in to a 150-year-old border war skirmish between the Kurdish tribal people and the Turks and not put American soldiers in harm's way, we thought that was a perfect example. And I have so many friends whose kids serve in the military, and I have 2 nephews in the military. We were like proud of that, but he was completely slaughtered in the media. And Trump and, you know, Rand will stand up for him and say, you know, if we'd had Hillary Clinton, we would have had American soldiers getting involved in yet one more thing. We could have had American soldiers lost. And my friends with sons in the military, they tell me all the time, I really appreciate Rand doing this. I appreciate him standing for our president on these things, because let's face it, the left has now become the biggest warmongers and neocons of all. Mm-hmm. There isn't an anti-war group anymore.
Yeah. I'm curious how you feel from having the perspective of someone who, you know, has a bit of a remove from the like Washington society kind of approach to things. What's your perspective on how out of touch you think DC maybe has become in recent years? Because it does seem to me like, in part thanks to the media bias, in part thanks to just an insulation from economic downturn or problems there, that there's a real insulation factor, a bubble factor there that is very tangible when you get out into real America.
Yeah, I agree. People are completely removed from the reason why America, you know, the reason why so many Americans support Trump. You can see it when they, you know, express their horror and indignation when Americans say, hey, the tax cut helped me, the booming economy helped me. These are issues that I like about Donald Trump. I like Donald Trump standing up and just being, you know, very frank and not using a lot of political doublespeak when he defends things like, you know, should boys be running in girls' track, biological boys be running in girls' track meets and stuff. You see the left just falling all over themselves, trying to contort themselves to support things that a lot of people don't support. And it's not that they're hateful. It's not that they're racist. It's none of those things. It's just that they want human beings to be seen as human beings. And, you know, I'll tell you, I did attend an event in DC with a very famous author, and I'm not gonna name her because this was a private conversation, but she actually told me that even though she is considers herself to be a liberal person and has always voted Democrat, she said, you know, I find it very difficult to have conversations with people on the left. She's like, I'd rather go to a dinner party full of people who identify as more conservative. Why? Because on the left, if you don't check every single box and you don't agree with them on every single issue, intersectionality, whatever, you are condemned. And this individual writer said, I come from a family with a lot of people in it that are more of a conservative mindset. And she said, I can't take them to any of my book parties or book events because they would be ridiculed. And, they would not be welcome because they don't agree with everything. And that's the thing that is most disturbing to me. We're in a world now where you cannot have, I have tons of liberal friends, and you can't have disagreements about policy or ideas or the way things should work. And I always look at it from this. I want the best for the most people, and so do you. And we might have different ideas about how to get there and how to have the most justice and how to have the most positivity for people and have the most prosperity for people. We might have different ideas about how to get there, but let's not malign and impugn each other's motives. And now it's all about this idea that you really don't want good for the most people. And that's what I'm so sad about.
Let's go out on this. Do you have any real hope that this violence will burn itself out, that it will kind of ultimately be something that we look back on as a temporary event? I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, about the violence in Portland, where the mayor there, Ted Wheeler, just had to move out of his apartment building, this high-rise building where he had an apartment, because they literally were setting fire to it. And, he couldn't have that happen with other people living there. It seems to me like this overreach is definitely going to prompt a backlash. It's just a question of how long that takes and what nature it takes on. Do you think that this is something where, we will see it get better, or do you think it's going to get worse?
I think it has to get better. I mean, what we're experiencing right now, if this continues, if this spreads all across the country to small towns, to medium towns, to people's neighborhoods, people aren't going to accept that. They're not. The people sitting outside at a cafe having lunch are not going to accept people coming up and taking their, beverage off the table and drinking it and screaming in their face. We're a great country. We're a country filled with people who want to support each other. We're the most generous country in the world. And this image of us as a hate-filled country has now spawned people who feel like they can go up to a complete stranger and just scream at them because they happen to be eating outside. That cannot continue. I do feel like that we're gonna see a turn here soon.
Let's hope you're right about that. Kelley, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. And I really enjoy your publication.
Thank you. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.